She was only 23 years old. The German soldiers were getting closer. The sound of gunfire cracked through the sunlit fields of the French countryside, and the air smelled of smoke and summer wheat. Beside her stood a young resistance fighter who had never seen combat before. She could still run. She could still try to escape into the tree line, disappear into the hedgerows, and wait for the danger to pass. Instead, she picked up her Sten gun, told him to go, and stayed. Who was this young woman? What force inside her made her choose to stand and fight alone against an SS regiment that had spent years perfecting the art of destruction? Why was an English girl, a mother, a daughter, a widow, crouched in a French field on a June afternoon in 1944, holding back the entire weight of the Third Reich with nothing but a submachine gun and a will that refused to break? Her name was Violette Szabo, and this is her story. Violette Réanie Elizabeth Bushell was born in Paris on the 26th of June 1921. Her father, Charles, was a British man from Brixton in South London. Her mother, Réanie, was a French woman from the Alsace region. Violette grew up between two worlds, the cobblestone streets of Paris and the busy, working-class neighbourhoods of London, and she seemed at home in both, perhaps because she belonged entirely to neither. She was, by every account, irresistible. Dark hair, dark eyes, a quick laugh, and a kind of fearlessness that made people both admire her and worry about her. As a teenager in Brixton, she could outshoot most of the boys at the local fairground stalls. She had a gift for it, for stillness, for timing, for the kind of calm that doesn't announce itself. Nobody understood then what that gift would one day cost her. When the war came to Europe in 1939, Violette was 18 years old. She was working as a shop assistant in London, living a quiet, ordinary life. But ordinary lives rarely stay that way when the world is on fire. In the summer of 1940, a Bastille Day parade wound through the streets of London, a gathering of Free French forces and allies in the heart of a city already bracing for German bombs. Violette was in the crowd. And in that crowd she noticed a man. His name was Etienne Szabo. He was a French Foreign Legion officer, proud and upright, with Hungarian blood and a French heart, and the bearing of someone who had already decided he would fight until the last breath in his body. They were married just weeks after they met, because that was what wartime love looked like, not slow and deliberate but urgent, fierce, and heartbreakingly brief. They had so little time together. A handful of weeks, perhaps a few months in stolen intervals between deployments, before Etienne was sent back to the fight. And then he was gone, first to Africa, then deeper into the war's grinding machinery. In June of 1942, Violette gave birth to their daughter alone. She named the little girl Tania. Etienne Szabo never met his daughter. He was killed at the Battle of El Alamein in October of 1942, fighting in the North African desert under a sun nothing like the Paris sky he had grown up beneath. When the news reached Violette, Tania was just a few months old. The two of them, mother and infant, were left behind in a country at war, with a name on a telegram and the particular silence that follows the end of everything you thought the future held. It would have been enough to break most people. It did not break Violette Szabo, it made her angry. And it made her decide. She had nothing left to protect but Tania and the memory of the man she had loved. So she chose to do something with that grief that grief almost never allows. She turned it into purpose. She wanted to fight, not from behind a desk or a factory line, but directly, actively, in whatever way she could reach her hands into the darkness and pull back. She was approached in 1943 by the British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, Churchill's famous organisation for conducting espionage, sabotage, and resistance operations behind enemy lines. The SOE had been described by the Prime Minister himself as an organisation built to set Europe ablaze. They were looking for agents who could pass as French, who could keep secrets under pressure, and who had the kind of internal steel that couldn't be manufactured but only discovered. When they found Violette Szabo, they knew immediately what they had. She passed the initial interviews. She was fluent in French. She was young, quick, convincing, but none of that mattered unless she could survive the training. And the training was not designed for survival. It was designed for revelation. She was sent first to the Scottish Highlands, then to a country estate in Hampshire, and eventually to a parachute school in Manchester. She learned to move through darkness without sound. She learned to send and receive wireless transmissions. She learned to kill with her hands if she had no weapon, and with a weapon if she did. She fired pistols and Sten guns until the actions became muscle memory. She jumped from aircraft into black night skis until the fear of falling felt ordinary. She was one of the finest shots her instructors had ever seen. In the spring of 1944, Violette Szabo was ready, or as ready as anyone could ever be for what was waiting on the other side of the channel, Her first mission, codenamed Stockbroker, took her to the area around Rouen in Normandy. The Prosper network, one of the SOE's most important resistance circuits in northern France, had been shattered. Agents were being arrested. The Gestapo was listening. Violette's task was to assess what remained of the local resistance, gather intelligence, and report back to London. She slipped into occupied France, moved through a landscape crawling with German soldiers and informers, made contact with local resistance members, completed her mission, and returned to England alive. It was April 1944. 2 months later, the world would change. On the 6th of June 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest military operation in human history. D-Day had begun. The liberation of Europe was finally, agonizingly underway. But the Germans were not retreating quietly. In the chaos that followed the landings, they tightened their grip on the French interior, hunting resistance fighters and shooting civilians without hesitation. It was into this world, this newly dangerous, newly desperate France, that Violette Szabo parachuted on the night of the 7th of June, 1944. Her second mission, codenamed Salesman 2, took her into the Limousin region of central France. She was there to help organize and coordinate the local maquis, the French resistance fighters hiding in the hills and forests, so they could delay and disrupt German troop movements as the Allies pushed inland from the coast. She had left Tania behind in London, in the care of her parents. With a kiss and a promise she had no certainty of keeping, for 3 days the mission went as planned. She met with resistance leaders. She passed messages. She moved through the countryside with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to belong everywhere and nowhere. She understood the risk. She had understood it from the beginning, but understanding a risk and being consumed by it are different things, and Violette Szabo was not the kind of woman who let fear make her decisions. On the 10th of June 1944, she was travelling by car through the Corrèze with 2 companions, Philippe Luer, her SOE circuit leader, and a young French resistance fighter named Jacques Duffer. They rounded a bend in the road near the village of Salon-la-Tour and drove directly into a German roadblock. SS soldiers. Armed, alert, and belonging to the Das Reich division, the same division that on that very day was in the process of massacring the village of Orada-sur-Glane and murdering over 600 men, women, and children in cold blood. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were the worst the Third Reich had to offer. The car stopped. There was a moment, that terrible, suspended moment that exists between the world before and the world after, and then the shooting started. Violette ran. Not away. Into the fight. She drew the soldiers toward her and away from her companions, plunging into an orchard and a wheat field on the edge of the road, turning and firing back with her Sten gun as she went. Duffer ran with her at first, but his ankle gave way. She told him to go. She covered him. She kept firing. She held off a trained SS unit alone in an open field in the summer heat of occupied France. For how long, no one knows precisely. Long enough. Long enough for her companions to escape. Long enough to do what she had come there to do, which was to fight back against the people who had taken everything from her, and from a continent that had not yet begun to count its dead. When she ran out of ammunition, they took her. She was 23 years old. The Germans who captured Violette Szabo did not know exactly who they had. They would learn. She was taken to Limoges for initial questioning, then transferred to the Gestapo headquarters at 84 Avenue Foch in Paris, the address that every SOE agent had been warned about, the place from which people rarely returned. She was interrogated. She gave them nothing. Not a name, not a location, not a circuit, a contact, a dead drop, or a wireless frequency. Whatever they asked her, whatever methods they used, she held the line. She protected every person she could protect. She was sent to Fresnes prison south of Paris. The weeks passed. Summer turned. The Allies were advancing. Paris would be liberated in August. But liberation came too late for Violette, who was put aboard a train heading east into Germany, into the dark machinery of the Nazi camp system. She arrived at Ravensbrück concentration camp in the autumn of 1944, along with 2 of her SOE sisters, Denise Bloch and Lillian Rolfe, both of whom had also been captured in France. The 3 women endured what the camp was designed to make endurable only by breaking the human spirit entirely. They were starved. They were worked. They were subjected to conditions that would have destroyed most people long before the worst could be administered. And yet, by the accounts of survivors who witnessed them there, all 3 women carried themselves with a dignity that other prisoners remembered for the rest of their lives. They helped others. They shared what little they had. Even in the worst place in the world, Violette Szabo remained, somehow herself, In late January or early February of 1945, the order came. Violette Szabo, Denise Bloch, and Lillian Rolfe were taken from their barracks at Ravensbrück and executed. Shot at the back of the neck, in the manner the SS reserved for those it had decided were no longer worth feeding. The exact date remains uncertain. Some records say the end of January, others say early February, because the camp administrators, sensing the approaching end of the war, had already begun destroying the evidence of what they had done. She was 23 years old when they killed her. Tania, her daughter, was not yet 3. The war ended in May of 1945. The world began the slow, incomplete work of counting what it had lost. And among the names that emerged from the wreckage, carved by investigators, by survivors, by the testimony of people who had seen something remarkable in impossible conditions, was the name Violette Szabo. In 1946, King George VI awarded her the George Cross, one of the highest decorations in Britain, reserved for acts of the greatest heroism or the most conspicuous courage in circumstances of extreme danger. It was presented, because Violette could no longer receive it herself, to her daughter Tania, a small child in a white dress, holding a medal she was too young to understand and too young to know what it had cost. France awarded her the Croix de Guerre. Her name was carved into the memorial at the Special Operations Executive Memorial at Valence. A plaque was placed on her family home in Brixton. The film Carve Her Name with Pride, released in 1958, with Virginia McKenna in the role of Violette, brought her story to millions of people who had never heard of her. And still her name is spoken today, in classrooms and museums and documentary films, by people who want to understand what courage actually looks like when it is stripped of everything comfortable and safe. What does it look like? It looks like a 23-year-old woman standing in a French field, holding a gun she knows is nearly empty, choosing to stay so that someone else can run. It looks like silence in a Gestapo interrogation room on the Avenue Foch. It looks like dignity in a place that was built specifically to take dignity away. Violette Szabo was not born extraordinary. She was born in Paris to an ordinary family, grew up in an ordinary London neighbourhood, fell in love, got married, had a child. Everything that made her remarkable was chosen under grief, chosen under pressure, chosen in full knowledge of what the choosing might cost. She did not save herself. She saved others. She went back a second time into a country that was hunting people exactly like her, because the work was not finished, and because she believed that the world her daughter would grow up in depended on people being willing to do the hard thing rather than the safe one. There are no monuments large enough for what she gave. There are only the names, carved carefully into stone and memory, and the quiet, stubborn fact that she existed, that she chose, and that because she did, something of the darkness was held back. Tania Szabo grew up knowing her mother through photographs and medals and the stories other people told. She kept the George Cross. She carried her mother's name. She has said in interviews given years later that she is proud, that she wishes the world could have known her mother the way she never quite did. We cannot give Tania Szabo back what the war took from her. We cannot give it back to any of the children left behind by the people who chose to fight. But we can remember, we can say the names. We can teach our children and our grandchildren what ordinary human courage actually looks like, so that when the world asks it of them, as the world sometimes does, they will know that ordinary people have done extraordinary things before. Violette Szabo was one of them, and her name deserves to last as long as there are people willing to speak it.